It's my last walk of my trip to the island, and feeling like I have a lot to talk about with myself when I get back home, and I have so much to do. And also realizing that having my feet, my bare feet on this rock, that in touchness is infinitely more powerful than anything I could say. And at the same time, all that I've said with myself has co-created me being right here, right now, with my feet on this rock. As I see the meaning of that, the importance, the significance, the sensitivity. And even when I'm at home, I do retreat to the forest quite often. It's something I need almost on a daily basis to acknowledge that I'm part of nature. I am nature too. And I feel like as I've connected even more with nature here, connecting with nature opens up more capacity to be able to connect with nature. So the brain becomes more and more sensitive to the infinite, eternal beauty. And as that sensitivity increases by connection with nature, then the pleasure circuits, the dopamine circuits, the needing to move according to one's own projections of what one thinks will give the next jolt of pleasure decreases. Because that state of looking for the next pleasure is seeking what we're projecting from the past as an assumption of what is going to give a shot of pleasure. So it's really, we're addicted to our own projections, and then we can't see the simple beauty. And not that there's no place for the movement of pleasure at all, but it loses its addictive quality. And then it just fades into the infinite richness of everything else, and it's not overemphasized. So it's not overemphasized as using that part of the brain as most important. And this morning I clicked on a link in an email I got from Lead Wise, which is an organization put on by Ricardo Semler, and he has that really interesting leadership style that is cool, and I couldn't remember his name until I saw it on that email. But the one I clicked on was a talk by a neuroscientist, Tara something, and she was saying that when people in jobs are not happy and worried and not satisfied, then the blood is diverted to the emotional part of the brain. I think she said it's the amygdala. So even though one's at work, one's not being productive. And it's the same sort of thing when we're out in the world. When all our blood supply in our brain is diverted towards what our personal little pleasure-seeking apparatus, then it's a very limited part of the brain, and we're desensitized to everything else but that which we are conditioned to feel would give us some happiness, which is, it's all marketing, it's all conditioning. We've been conditioned to want this and want that and do this and do that and get a shot of dopamine in our brain like Pavlov's dog. And I talked a lot about that with myself, and I think that was the first clip where I heard a neuroscientist say pretty much that the blood supply goes into the me circuits and the poor me and all this, and then of course we're not being productive if productivity is something important. I feel there's a different state altogether, which isn't lack of productivity versus productivity, but a sensitivity and a creativity. Maybe I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but it was interesting because I've been reading some Krishnamurti, and he also is saying that our brains are used very partially, and that goes along with what is being said by the neuroscientists of blood going into a very partial part of the brain. And I think it's partial also when it goes into the pleasure circuits all the time. And then that part of the brain grows and is overemphasized. And then we lose our neurofluidity, and we're neuroplastic. We're plastically, mechanically carrying out, moving according to our projections. And the other part of the post was saying how the executive functions of the human brain, which are the ones that are going to be difficult to computerize, are the ones that we need to move into, because pretty much everything else is going to be computerized. So if people's brains have the capacity that can be taken over by the computer, it will be taken over by the computer. So we need to ensure that we keep up with the capacities that can't be mechanized. Can a computer appreciate nature and beauty? And then one might say, well, what does that matter? Well, with more and more human beings on the planet, we need to ensure that everyone can be fed with food and blah, blah, blah. But anyways, I feel like when we go into map consciousness, a lot of that which cannot be computerized is awakened. The spontaneity of living joyfully. And the neuroscientist said something about the executive functions in the brain are the ones we have to cultivate, like complex problem solving. And I think there's a different way to look at that too. Moving creatively solves problems without having to think I'm solving problems. But we're so conditioned to solve problems that we think of it as complex problem solving, when so many of the complex problems have been created by the same level of thinking that we're using to try to solve those problems, and that's not going to do it. And then they said another executive function is emotional regulation. There's a place for emotions, but to have so much of our life ruled by them is a waste of energy. So emotional regulation, when we see the insignificance of it all, a lot of that energy would be reduced in usage as it would fall away, as it's kind of like a vestigial function. No longer really that necessary, because our personal emotions are related to our personal pleasures and our personal drives, and personal drives don't have much to do with creativity, which is what heals and solves problems by virtue of being creative without having to think I'm healing and I'm solving problems. So there's still a higher level of functioning than the ones they're talking about in these executive levels of functioning, because from the level of thought and thinking that we have now, we're seeing those as the highest levels. But can we see higher levels from the level of thinking that we're at now? No, not necessarily. But then people can say, well, there's flow states and all of that, which is something beyond executive functioning, possibly. And then people are trying to get into flow. Anyways, I listened to a webinar by Jamie Wheel on adaptive leadership, and it was really good and really fascinating, because what he's talking about is exactly what I've been talking about with myself this whole time, but in a different context. He's talking to people who are leaders of organizations or families, and he was saying that, or asking, how many people have had peak experiences? And most people had. And the whole point of it was, if somebody's had a peak experience, how do you bring that back to one's organization. And this is what I'm saying exactly with Harvest One's mania. Mania is a peak experience. And how do we look at that and bring that back to our neurotribe, to our people, to our fellow beings? That's what I'm saying. He was saying some of us have more resources, or he's talking to leaders in companies. Maybe they have more money, so they go on better vacations and get better professional development and things like that. And he's saying, so how does one take that, because not everyone has the same resources, and utilize that to help others that are not able to access the same resources, to help them level up? And so he's saying exactly what I'm saying. I've gotten to a certain place, and who knows where that is. And how do I share something that might help people like me in my neurotribe, my fellow beings that are suffering? And this has nothing to do with business or company, but just humanity. How do I share something that might help people level up if they want? And he made that really good point, and that was the point I was making to myself exactly yesterday. And then I watched the webinar, and the webinar also mentioned rock climbing, and I had just looked at rocks and been like, wow, I wonder if I want to rock climb. So it was strange and interesting that way. I do think what they're doing with flow resonates with me. They just haven't extrapolated it to people who access different resources in the human mind and brain and being through these peak states that are non-volitional, that are so powerful that they blow out the whole ego functioning structure, and then one looks like afterwards they have some kind of mental illness, when it's a complete reboot. That type of peak experience, it wipes everything away. We can get it back, and a lot faster. It's not like we have to relearn to walk, relearn to use the bathroom, but we do have to relearn to do a lot of these contrived things that are part of our conditioning, that if people are still conditioned, like the medical system, they think that losing that is a part of some illness, as if that, all of that invisible curriculum, all that stuff we're conditioned, all of that unwritten rules of society that maybe Temple Grandin might talk about, all of that gets wiped away, and we have to relearn it. But when we relearn it, it becomes something we're aware of, but it's not all of life. We're not so immersed in it that we see it as so important. If we did see it as so important and necessary, and if it was important and necessary, we would get back to that really quickly and easily. But the thing is, we're awakened to so much more that's meaningful, significant, important, and necessary. But there isn't that structure in life. There isn't that, and this is a thing that he brought up, and this was an aha moment for me, was that he brought up this idea of scaffolding. And he brought it up in the example of how this man, he was dyslexic and things, and he did poorly on standardized tests, and then he developed the exact same test, but I think what it was that people could put their responses in a mind map type answer versus linear paper. And the people who did poorly on IQ tests did 40% better. On the same test, just different scaffolding is what Jamie Wheel said. And as I said, this was an epiphany and an aha for me, because I was thinking, well, what is the scaffolding for people like me? And the scaffolding is lifestyle design. So take a person after some kind of transformational crisis called mental illness, and it's called mental illness. Well, before that person was functioning in life, and all of a sudden they're not functioning in that particular design of life, like say 9-to-5 job, habit, routine, living situation that one had. So if one is trying to get that back, one is likely going to do 25 to 40% worse. So one needs a new scaffolding. So a new way to live life, because map consciousness invited us to a different way of living life, a totally different way of living, perception and action in the moment, which is flow. Yet all of our lives are designed for habit, and we're trying to get people to recover back into habit and routine. So I feel like the same person who's seemingly non-functional, which is the equivalent of doing poorly on an IQ test and said not to be intelligent, not to be functional, having a different scaffolding could do 25 to 40% better. So what I'm saying is, in this course thing I want to design, that is key, is this different scaffolding, because we're not necessarily going to be given more financial resources. I haven't really had more financial resources than other people in my position. I have managed to work a little bit here and there, and I'm lucky that I had good credit, so I was able to get a line of credit and sometimes go into debt up to $5,000. I think one time close to $7,000, so I can continue to live my lifestyle. It's not exuberant, but being able to drive my little car, and I'll be right back. One of the main things that put me more into debt was my hospitalization in April 2016, because I was really careful about working and getting overloaded after that. And then I stopped eating healthy, but I still went into debt because life is expensive. Right now I think I'm about even, so that's good, and I will get the iPhone because I want to record this new course on the new iPhone. So yeah, the scaffolding thing, and I want to talk more about what he talked about in the webinar, because he is saying the exact same thing in that 1-hour webinar that I've been saying in these 200 hours of video. And I've been living that, and I've been living in beauty and everything. And it would be nice to not live in financial poverty, and I don't think that that's necessary forever. But more importantly is sharing a scaffolding that might help people like me live a different kind of life, because that map conscious state is inviting us into that. So it's important to move into that which we were invited into. And the recovery movement is inviting us back into the monotony and routine and drudgery of life. And not saying there's no place for some of that, but if we can move towards something else for ourselves and see what happens. It's an experiment, it's not a guarantee. And I really do feel that moving towards one's dreams and designing and creating that as we go and living it little bit by little bit, or big bit, whatever we design, is what tells our being that we're living, and that state of map consciousness we felt we're really living. And even if we're not in that state of map consciousness anymore, can we design stretches of our life at least closer to our dreams than to the drudgery of recovery? We don't want to recover over our dreams continually. And I'm seeing that by living segments of my dream in my life, that made other dreams possible, because as we live creatively, as we live according to our design and our dreams, that other stuff falls away. It's not necessary when we're fully living our life. Of course the mind is going to freak out and create all these abstract thoughts and tune into the craziness of the collective human unconscious if we're living in a room. We're not moving. We're static. We're this static antenna picking up any kind of crap. But when we're moving with the infinity of life and to the fullest expression of our human life at any given moment, that stuff can't accumulate on us. It can't touch us. Our brain is tuned into an immense infinity, and little thoughts can't even reach us. And I don't know if this is true for sure. I'm just saying it. So I don't want to say that Jamie Wheel and the Flow people are my inspiration, because these are all things that I've come to myself. They've come to it by the way they're living and by how they've taught thousands of million and billion-dollar executives. Well, my people are people like me. It's not about making millions and billions of dollars, but it's definitely about richness. It's about the richness of living and inviting people to design and live life as a rich scaffolding. And I've talked to myself about creating a web of context to crowd out the memes and the stories of the mental health system. And that is the first scaffolding. That is the first part of this design, which doesn't take money. It doesn't take money to sit and talk to oneself and really consider and harvest some of these experiences and ways of being and states of consciousness, and consider what else it could be besides the story. And when we believe and adopt that story, we then move in a life of that story. The psychiatrist appointments, the hospitalizations, the med changes, the this rehab, the that rehab, the this clinician, appointment with this person, appointment with that person. When we start to design a dream, so there's the web of context, but then design one dream and live it for a day and see how much gets healed, which could be living as one's manic self for a day, going out and being spontaneous, moving according to what one sees in the day, giving something out, talking to random people, designing that way of living for one day. And that's why the magical backpack is an integral part of that, or whatever one designs. And I haven't experimented with the magical backpack yet. I have to some extent, because I do have stuff in my bag that I carry with me, but I want to make it more fun and incorporate fun and silly gestures. And if I do incorporate a business, it's to incorporate fun and silliness and craziness and this kind of life, and say it's okay to live in this much joy. And others don't feel it, but if we start to gesture in that way, it invites the joy back. And I haven't fully done that yet, and it's because it's not time. If it was time for that, I would have done it, but I haven't. I feel like the micronutrients will help me gesture in that joy. And I feel like I have undertaken this serious research project of my life to come to this point of taking micronutrients instead of the meds. And now for me it's about, well, can one live sensitively to nature, and when around humans live really joyfully and share that joy? And I'm not there yet, because I'm not able to say, ha, I'm on micronutrients, not meds, and look at life. Look at this movement of life. So yeah, that's exciting, and yeah, I want to talk about the micronutrient paper when I get home, talk about some other stuff I discovered here. And that was a part of the thing that Jamie Wheel said that I don't think I went into. I said, that's exactly what I was talking about yesterday, and then he was talking about it, which was, this isn't right for everybody. And it's not about making someone change or saying someone should change. It's an invitation. It's a creation. It's not saying people have to change. And I don't think I have that perspective at all in these dialogues with myself, because I really don't know. This moment now is perfect, and there'll be moments in the future that are different and perfect in their own way. So there's no ultimate it. There is no ultimate moment. There's no ultimate experience. The ultimate is in the freedom to move beyond habits and beyond routines, to be sensitive to the whole infinity, and to allow the beauty of the world to open up the entire brain, to allow blood to flow to the entire brain, not only to the parts that we're projecting, that we're seeking, or that we want, or that we desire, and then we're missing out on the totality. It's not that we want a particular thing. It's more, we're aware that we're not moving freely. So can we erase that which would prevent this free movement? And the free movement is the movement of perception. If we're only projecting, we're not perceiving, and then we're moving according to our projections, and we're in a prison of our own brain cells. The projections in our brain cells are our prison. And this morning I did some bug saving from the pool. There's a grasshopper stranded on a leaf, and I've rescued a couple of those guys. And I pulled this poor little guy out of the pool. I'll bury him. I might be able to get you now. I got you. There. Go and live your life.